بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. As always, we begin with the praises of Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the most kind, the most merciful, the benevolent. We send peace, salutation, the choicest of salawat upon Sayyiduna Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Allahumma fasalli wa sallim وأنعم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. We continue, inshallah, with the في ظلال القرآن, in the shade of the Quran series. Before we begin, we take this opportunity to apologize for last night. Yesterday there was some server issues, something which was beyond our control. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us ease. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep in front of us the asbab and the means wherein, insha'Allah, we can grow closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because we missed out last night, I will give a quick recap, insha'Allah, with regard to the discussion so that we can have some cohesion between the discussion that we had the previous night and tonight's discussion. We were making mention with regard to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Quran having granted us the shade of sabr, the shade of patience and forbearance, and the shade of salah in Quran. In Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah Azza wa Jal at two different intervals makes mention with regard to sabr and with regard to salah. Both of these are mentioned in two different contexts. One context which we discussed the night prior to the previous night, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes mention, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu ista'inu bis-sabri was-salah, that O you who have faith, that you should seek help, you should seek assistance with forbearance and with prayer. This was in the context of difficulty and hardship at the time of the Battle of Badr, where there were 14 Sahaba and companions who were martyred, and it was in first instant in the deen where there were martyrs and casualties of this nature. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed this verse to console the mu'minun, the believers, and to give them an avenue that where should they seek solace and peace at the time of musibah, at the time of hardship and difficulty. And from this we concluded that one type of sabr and one type of patience is as-sabru ala al-musibah, the patience which one exercises in the face of hardship and the face of difficulty. The next instance where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes mention with regard to sabr and salah is wasta'inu bis-sabri was-salah, that you should seek assistance with forbearance, with sabr and with prayer. And this came at the backdrop of the discussion of the rabbis of the Banu Israel who had found it difficult to come into the fold of Islam. And the primary reason that they had found difficulty to enter into the fold of Islam was because there was too much sacrifice on their part. The primary reasons that Quran mentions, that one was the love of money and the other was the love of power, that both of these combined served a trial and a tribulation to the rabbis of the Banu Israel, that they could not come into the fold of Islam because of the sacrifice of both of these wants or both of these desires, the love of luxury, the love of wealth, and the love of power. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this verse in Surah Al-Baqarah provided the antidote for the love of wealth and the love of power. And in this verse of Quran, that wasta'inu bis-sabri was-salah, that by exercising patience and by resorting to prayer, this is the antidote for the love of wealth and the antidote for the love of power or the love of fame and the love of materialism. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is an amazing thing, and this is the point that we had left the discussion on, that any person, whilst we know that the principle of Quran is that generally even though unless it is something specified to a particular context, it is not limited and restricted to that context. In other words, that even though these two solutions were provided as the antidote for the rabbis not coming into the fold of Islam, that does not mean that this serves as an antidote only for that context. But in fact, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through this verse provides this as an antidote for any person who suffers the same. In other words, if somebody is struggling with the love of dunya and they are materialistic and have materialistic tendencies without the ability to curb these tendencies, then the antidote to this materialism is the same. It is a person needs to exercise sabr and patience, and a person needs to exercise salah. In other words, that sabr and forbearance will become the antidote for the love of dunya, the love of materialism, and the antidote for the love of power. In the same way, so sabr and salah is the antidote for the love of dunya, and it is the antidote for the love of power. And both of these, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made them effective in curbing both of these two desires. If we reflect carefully today in the world, generally this is the need, the urge. When we look across the social media platforms, then by and large it is one of two matters. It is motivated by the love of dunya, or it is motivated by the love of fame, by the love of leadership, by the love of power. How many followers I have, how influential am I need to be an influencer. All of these are all wrapped in this same craving, the same want, and the same need. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here provides to you and I the solution that if one just finds themselves unable to detach themselves from the dunya, and there's just this need, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provides a solution, that one needs to be able to exercise sabr and forbearance in being able to resist the temptation, and the same way resorting to prayer, and the same way resorting to salah. In other words, this antidote one cannot allow. Quran is amazing in the sense of direction of spirituality that it provides, because it doesn't leave the heart to linger. The natural tendency of the heart is to roam, it's to be free. The natural tendency of the being of insan and the heart of insan is that it will roam freely. In other words, it's impossible that the heart is free of thought. There's never a time that the heart is free of thought. And the natural tendency would be that it will venture into areas and into spaces of desire and want, and that which satisfies its craving. So the heart naturally gravitates towards that. And even if a person, by all their attempts, right, wants to keep their heart free from thoughts which are ill, which are desirous. A thought comes into the mind of a person, and they try to curb that thought. They try to nurture that thought, that I won't harbor this tendency in the heart. That's an impossibility. In other words, one cannot curb the natural tendency of the heart. What needs to be done, it needs to be rechanneled. That's the only way. In other words, channel it towards the right thing, and in that way, the natural tendency where it's gravitating towards, that tendency will be curbed, and in that way it will be reformed. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us that process here, that the natural tendency is to gravitate towards dunya. But if you want to turn away from that, then you must exercise sabr. But sabr in itself, as we mentioned previously, this is an internal state. One needs to occupy the heart and the mind with something else in order for it to be freed from where it's gravitating towards. And in that sense, salah becomes the perfect antidote to this. I occupy the heart, occupy the mind in salah in a way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala desires, And that is an antidote. That is a solution. It's a spiritual solution for this love of power, for the love of money. Now, if we analyze this even further, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Quran is giving us this solution that what is salah doing? Salah is a cure. It's a cure for what? It's a cure for pride. Because naturally power is associated with pride. It is associated with ambition. It is associated with desire. So a person who is occupying themselves with salah, in that way they are perfecting their spirituality. And this is the art of spirituality that was mentioned a few days ago when we began discussing this topic of the shade of sabr and the shade of salah. Now one asks the question that I am making salah, but yet this tendencies, the craving, the gravitating towards sin, the gravitating towards dunya, the gravitating towards want and need, that craving is not being curbed. I make my prayer, I'm very regular on my prayer, yet I don't find that there is a limit or restriction which is coming on this tendency. And in this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also provides the answer. If we analyze Quran, rarely is there a place or two where the word salah appears in Quran, except the word aqimus salah or iqamatus salah appears with it. Salah does not appear on its own individually. Yes, there are some places, like in the verses that were quoted, the word salah here appears without iqamah. But by and large, we'll open Quran, we will find aqimus salah, that you should establish prayer. That is a very raw or a very literal translation, because if we look at the word aqama or iqamatus salah, if we look at it from a lexicon or lexically, we will find that this word, the word aqama yuqimu, means to make something straight, to set something firm. So in other words, what does aqimus salah means? That like how one plants a tree firmly in the ground that it becomes rooted, or one builds a foundation, a wall, and they firmly root the foundation beneath the ground. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what is meant here? There are multiple benefits that come from iqama, from establishing. One is that when a foundation is laid for something, this gives an indication to perpetuality, continuity. In other words, if there is a tree which is firmly rooted in the ground, that's an indication that this tree is there to stay. The wall that's built, it means that it has longevity, it has a long period of existence, it has a continuity of existence. So in the same way, one meaning of iqamatus salah, if you want to derive maximum benefit from prayer, that it becomes the antidote to sin and desire, then you need to do salah continuously. It's not like one performs salah occasionally or certain months of the year or certain days of the year. Certainly, indeed, Allah will reward us if we do that. But if we want the maximum benefit as an antidote to sin, then it needs to be done continuously. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Quran describes it, that inna salata kanat ala al-mu'minina kitaban mawquta, that indeed prayer has been rendered obligatory upon the believers at designated times. Designated times means within those times wherein salah does not become qada, the legitimate, permissible, necessary, obligatory time, salah is performed in that time. So even though a person may have missed a prayer and they make up the prayer at a later stage, one is the obligation will fall away from that person indeed, because they've now made up the missed prayer. But the effect and the impact of that prayer will not be found when they are making qada. If one wants the effect of prayer, then they need to do it in its designated time. And so that's one aspect of it. Iqamatus salah means that a person needs to perform salah in its designated time. That is how the salah becomes an antidote to sin. In the same way, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Quran mentions that inna salata tanha anil fahsha'i wal munkar. Now this is an amazing ayah, because what is Quran telling us with certainty? That inna salah, the word inna in the Arabic language comes to emphasize something, to indicate an emphatic statement, i.e. that there is no doubt. So when the ayah begins and says inna salata, that indeed prayer, this is an established emphatic statement that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is making. We have complete conviction in Quran, complete yaqeen in every letter of Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that indeed prayer, definitely prayer, what does it do? Its impact is tanha anil fahsha wal munkar. It prohibits, it stops a person from disobediences and from lewdness. I.e. that disobedience and lewdness is an extreme of disobedience. So salah is that it stops a person from disobedience. So we asked the question earlier that a person says, but I am making prayer, I'm regular on my prayer, I'm even doing it in its designated time, yet I cannot stop myself from falling into sin. Therefore, now there's one of two things here. Either the statement of salah, the statement of Quran is incorrect, that salah does not stop one from disobedience because I'm making prayer yet I'm falling into sin. Or either there's something wrong with my prayer. It's either one of two things. Either the claim of Quran is wrong, or either my claim of establishing prayer is wrong. Clearly, we have complete conviction on Quran, there's no doubt. Quran remains as it is. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that prayer is that which prohibits, which stops a person from wrong, disobedience and lewdness. That statement is definitive, it's absolute, it's undoubted, which means it only leaves us with the second option. That means the way that I am doing prayer is something which is left to be desired. And this is where another statement of the Mufassirun become relevant. We said earlier that one meaning of iqama means to establish something with firmness, to give it longevity, to give it continuity. But another meaning of iqamatus salah, establishing prayer, means that a person does prayer with all of its proper internal and external tenets and requirements. That a person who is praying does not just pray haphazardly in a way that they choose to pray. I.e., that if we want prayer to become effective and to help us abstain from sin, then we need to do it externally in a way that fulfills its rights. That prayer becomes the antidote to sin. And not only the external state, but also the internal state of prayer. The internal state of prayer, it becomes such that it is being done in a way that is obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Meaning that externally a person looks at the way that they are performing the prayer, that the limbs, the postures of prayer, the recital in prayer, how am I doing all of this? If all of this is being done in a way externally that is not in a proper method, that I'm not bending, for example, properly in sajda, I'm not reciting properly in my salah, all these external factors, I'm not standing straight up, I don't fulfill what the sunan are, then that salah is now losing its potency as an antidote to sin. So the more perfect externally a prayer is, the more it is now powerful, or the more it has the ability to restrain a person from sin and external sin. In the same way, the more perfect the concentration of the heart is on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the more that internal state of salah has or builds the ability of restraining the internal state of sin. This is amazing. Muhaddithun and ulama have written that the perfection, the ability to stay away from sin is reflected from the external of prayer, and the ability to stay away from internal sin, harboring ill thoughts, bringing haram into the mind, into the heart. All of this, the more perfect the concentration, the khushu' in the prayer is, the more a person will be able to maintain staying away from harboring ill thoughts. This is an amazing thing. In other words, we can safely say that the more perfect externally a prayer is, the more that is the antidote to abstinence from sin with the external limbs. And the more perfect the internal prayer is, the more perfect the internal state of the heart is during prayer, the more that heart will build the resistance to harboring ill and haram thoughts internally. Now think of it for a moment. If a person in salah cannot concentrate on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a state of prayer, when the head is in sajda, there's no closer place. أَقْرَبُ مَا يَكُونُ الْعَبْدُ إِلَى اللَّهِ. The closest that a person is to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is fi sujood. When a person is in sajda, imagine the head in sajda, the closest physical position to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's proximity, yet in that state, a person cannot bring concentration on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How will it be that in the middle of the day, in the office, in the middle of the city, in a tempting environment, that a person's heart will be connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So salah is the perfect example. It's the perfect training to come under the shade of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One day, Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. See, the khushu' and tawadu', humility, humbleness, these are all internal states. They are not external states. And one needs to train one's internal state in salah to be able to build this resistance. This is the art of spirituality in Quran. One day, Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu anhu, there are two incidences actually. One of them is that he saw one young man, he was walking in the middle of Medina Munawwara, and he saw one young man, and this was after the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, during the Khilafah of Sayyidina Umar radiyallahu anhu. And this young man, he was walking around with tattered clothing, and he was disheveled, and he was walking around all humbly all over the place. And Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu came and he asked the people, like, who is this man? Who is this young person? So they said that, Amir al-Mu'mineen, don't you know that this man, this young person, he is known for his piety. You know, he's detached from the world. Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu went up behind him and he gave him one smack on the back of the head. And he said that this is not the reflection of piety. Khushu', piety, connectiveness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a state of the heart. Yes, it will reflect itself externally, but this is not it. In fact, many a time ulama have forbidden that a person manifest externally a state of piety. This is not what piety is about. Khushu' and the heart being connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a state of the internal. So there Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, by this action of his, is vindicating this very same point, that we need internal training in salah to connect the heart to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Once, in the time of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, he was standing at the back of the masjid. So somebody saw him there, and he was just observing the congregation, people were praying. So somebody came to him and they asked him, Amir al-Mu'mineen, why are you standing here? What are you doing here? He said that, I am observing the prayer of people. So they asked him, why are you standing and observing the way people are making salah? Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu replied that I intend to appoint an Amir for the army. I want to appoint a leader and I don't know who to appoint. So I'm standing here and I'm observing the external state of the prayer of people. Based on that, I can judge the temperament and the character of that individual. and based on that, I will appoint that person as the Amir of the army. In other words, Sahaba radiallahu anhum, Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu understood from this incident that prayer is in reality a reflection of the temperament of a person. If a person's prayer is perfect externally, we can take it to mean that this person, insha'Allah, that this person, he is externally, the state of this person is one which will abstain from sin. That's why ulama have written that you can read in the temperament of a person. If a person generally, if you will find them to be, say, hasty in life, you will find that their prayer is exactly the same. That the prayer is very hasty, and therefore this extends to other parts of their life. If you find a person is calm in prayer, you will find the temperament of that person to be calm in prayer. In the same way, these days we have many states of the medication is prescribed to harness and to hone and to tame the tendency of people when they perceivably carry certain diseases. I'm not denying this, diseases or illnesses, but what it means is, like, a person suffers from a lack of concentration, and the ability to bring back that concentration is done through a medical means. Quran prescribes a different prescription for this. It's not that we deny that or we refuse that, but Quran provides the antidote and the solution for that. If there's an inability to concentrate, then make salah and build the ability to concentrate during that prayer, and build the ability to stand motionless in that prayer. And through this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants a solution and grants the antidote to all types of hardships and difficulty that one may be experiencing in this area. So, not to digress too much, we are busy discussing fi dhilal al-Quran, in the shade of Quran. And that brings us to the end of this discussion, that the shade of Quran provides in this instance is in sabr and salah, that one is a sabr ala al-musibah, that one who is in hardship and makes sabr in the face of hardship and difficulty. And the other is that the person who wants to stay away and build resistance against sin, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given the twin shades of sabr and salah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the ability, the understanding to make tawfiq and to make amal on what has been said. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.